Hey everybody,
Hello.
Aaron here, Liana there, Bailey down here. So in this episode we're going to be working on a lot of countertops as well as our sink and faucet for our kitchen area. So we're really excited about it.
Yep, so we have 5 countertops that we are going to be working on in this episode. A few of them we use Formica on, which looks like marble. You'll see that in a bit. And then we have a couple different countertops that we're staining. So the 5 different countertops we're covering are our Dinette, which is the table that will convert to our bed mode, or our bed platform when we convert to bed mode. We have our kitchen countertop, and then we have a flip-up counter that will extend the kitchen countertop so we have more counter space. And then moving to the outside of the van, we have a flip-down tabletop that we'll be able to utilize by our sliding door. And then at the rear of the van, we have a pull-out step drawer that has some countertops in there. So if we want to use that as a table or set down drinks or glass or anything out there, then we have that to leverage as well. And then I guess the unofficial 6th countertop that we cover is a little platform that we have kind of as an armrest next to our bed and dinette area. So lots of counters. No matter where we are, we'll have a space to put down a cup or anything that
White Claw.
Or White Claw.
So we hope you're ready. Buckle up, this is going to be a long one. Grab some snacks and yeah, it's time to crunch.
Let's do it.
We're going to be working on our galley or kitchen countertop, and as you can see we got our sink in. It's pretty sweet, and I've also cut down this piece of 3/4 inch plywood which will serve as our countertop. So we're going to be just doing Formica on them. It gave us the flexibility to have whatever colors we want and didn't weigh as much as something like a solid surface or granite, quartz, all that stuff. So let's get into it. So a little background on our cabinet. Our cabinet is 19 3/4 by 53 inches long, so that's pretty much the piece of wood I cut. However, I did add about an inch on the depth just because we want this overhang. That way, if we spilled any liquids up here, it doesn't just immediately run into our drawers and hopefully spills more onto the ground than anything. But this gives us about a 3/4 inch gap from the drawer fronts, which seems like a good amount from what we measured from inside of our house. So with that being said, here is our sink. So this is a workstation sink. This is made out of stainless steel. The total dimensions is 18 by 18 and then 9 inches deep, which will pretty much be the exact dimensions or the maximum dimensions that we could fit within our little sink partition. So this is nice. It's nice and deep. It's bigger than probably a lot of people's vans, I'm assuming, but we wanted to be able to wash dishes in here comfortably and not get water everywhere. So the other benefit of this workstation style sink is it came with a bunch of little goodies. So it came with this little rollout drying rack that you could set on this little shelf. It'll roll out across the plane and then you can dry your dishes. There's also like a little cutting board cover that you could also stick on these little ledges to kind of cover up this area when you're not using it. And then you could obviously also use it as a cutting board. And then there's a little, I forget what the official term is, but you set this at the bottom right here to prevent scratches from occurring on the stainless. Comes with a bunch of hardware for mounting the sink to your countertop, and then it also comes with a drain. So the drain opening, as far as this goes, is 3.5 inches. That's pretty standard. And then this goes to a 1.5 inch drain, whatever they call it, DWV thread. So that'll lead directly into our P-trap. That's kind of what all the drain system's about. And that'll be perfect for our HEPVO valve, which we've previously installed for our shower. I just moved the sink, but one of the things that I also want to point out why we got this was because it comes with its own kind of like auxiliary port, where you could either put a soap dispenser or something like a freshwater or drinking water spout. But looking back at the documentation that they provide, you basically use this as a template to make your cutout. So the cutout itself is 17 by 17 and the sink is 18 by 18 around. So that means that there's pretty much a 1/2 inch all the way around the perimeter, which is where your flange would sit. So the cutout is obviously a little bigger than this flange, but there are little tabs here that stand about 1/2 inch from the edge, which is how you mount your sink to your countertop. So moving this out of the way, I can kind of give you the logic about how I measured this, but my first step was basically marking middle. So I want this to be aligned center with our partition here. And then I also marked these lips, right? So this is places where I don't want to be cutting, because that would mean I would be cutting outside of the boundary of our cabinet. So once I got mid, I just had to figure out how far away I wanted the front and back to be. I basically just chose center. So that ended up being, I think, 1 1/8 inch. So from my lip, I went 1 1/8 inch, which is this line. So that's the start of my cut. Then from there, I went 8.5 inches this way and 8.5 inches this way, which gives us the 17-inch opening for this bottom section. Then from there, I basically just took that line up, going parallel with our side. And then from there, I could kind of line up my bottom right corner with that area, and then trace the rest. So just for confirmation's sake, you want to make sure that wherever you're drawing stuff is within the boundary of your cabinet, and then you also want to try to make sure that you're either offsetting your flange from the back or the front, depending on how you want it to look. But in our case it's center, so it's pretty much the same on both sides. As far as cutting this, I'm probably going to try to drop my circular saw in, so plunge cut some of these straight edges. It probably won't matter, but otherwise you could just drill a pilot hole and then stick your jigsaw around and cut it out. So that's going to be our next steps here. Just made the cutout, and now I'm test fitting the sink. Came out really nicely. Went exactly to plan. So my next steps are to also make a slight cutout in our cabinet. So if I take you inside, we have some like supporting structures, some framing members that I need to trim down. So I'm deciding if I want to keep it at this 1/2 inch piece. Since a lot of it is going to be cut out, it'll probably be like only like 1 inch on this side, and replace it with a 3/4 inch, or just leave it as is. I might just leave it as is, but I'll have to cut out a little whatever notch in both sides to fit our sink. So let's do that. We do a lot of cooking at home, and we wanted to make sure that our van is comfortable enough for us to cook. So as you know, our kitchen countertop is relatively small. It's 53 inches long by 20 inches deep, and we wanted to make sure that we're utilizing all of the available space in the van. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be building a little flip up countertop that kind of extends all the way to the passenger seat. So that way we could set whatever cooking stuff that we need, potentially our induction cooktop or maybe our cutting board, whatever, and it'll give us a little bit more area to work with. So we're really excited about that. And I've already ordered the mounting hardware for it. So these are some, I think they actually call it just a fold up table mount, something like that. They're relatively cheap on Amazon, and they have a locking mechanism that when they are in the up position, they stay there until you depress this little lever. So for our purposes, this will be mounted to the siding of our kitchen cabinet. So it'll be something like this. Each of these brackets supports 60 kilograms, which is more than enough. However, it comes down to however much our siding can support. So this is 1/2 inch Baltic birch. We're gonna see if we can get away with it, but worst comes to worst, I'll just put some sort of support on the inside and screw into that as well. So let's get this installed. I cut a piece of wood out. This ended up being 17 3/4 by 20 inches long, which is perfect for our little area. So since we have our little button switches here to control our lighting, I wanted to make sure that this didn't interfere with it, and then I also gave it a little bit of spacing just so that it's kind of nicely boxed in and symmetric all around. So our little board here, carefully held up with my knee and a little bit of pressure, is going to go right there. So I'm liking how that looks. I would have wished that we could line it up with our overhang here, but what that would mean is you're essentially creating an overhang all along this edge, which might look a little weird. So at this point, I've got some tape down and a little bit of penciling on there just to kind of estimate where I want my brackets to be. So for our brackets, we're just going to be going 2 inches from the side, 2 inches from the side in terms of where our extending countertop will be, and then we're going to mount those brackets. The brackets will be a little bit easier to install since we don't have our sink installed yet and it's not fixed. But while I have this kind of open, I wanted to show you a few improvements that we've made. So number one, we added a filter. They're very simple. You just basically take your supply line, push it to the input of the filter, and then the output of the filter also has that same supply line fitting. And then aside from that, we added this little rubbish shelf. So it's a tilt out shelf, so we could store like sponges and all that good stuff. But both of these were very easy to install. They both came with a template to basically mark your little drill holes, and then you take your screws and screw those into the holes. So this is a great way to maximize every little spot for storage. Then with our sink out, my plan is to basically use this countertop as like a mock countertop that we'll be using for our little extending bit. So my plan is to line up our brackets with the lines that I've marked out already, and then I want to make sure that it's square with this countertop because this is essentially going to be what we're going to be mounting to it. So we want them all to be on the same plane, and then we want it all to swing down, hopefully perfectly parallel, so that there's no overlap on this right side. Our holes are marked now, so what I did was I touched this to the bottom of our counter and then lined up the bracket with our line, which we knew was square with the siding. It's time to drill out these little dimples. I stuck a piece of tape on our drill bit just to make sure that I don't go all the way through our 1/2 inch plywood. So this is about 3/8 of an inch, so let's get these drilled. So there's lots of good resources online on how to apply laminate to a substrate such as MDF, or in our case plywood, but I'm going to briefly go over what we're going to be using today. So first off, you need a way to cut your laminate. So for this small piece, which is just going to be a test since I have never done this before, I'm just going to be using a jigsaw. But if you wanted to cut long straight lines, you could also get a circular saw blade. So when you're buying a circular saw blade, or in that case a jigsaw blade, you want to make sure it's pretty much as high tooth count as possible. So in this case, our circular saw blade, we got a 60 tooth one, and then as far as our jigsaw, I'm not sure what this one is. This one's 36 TPI, which is basically a metal cutting blade. So that's how we're going to cut the laminate. Then you need a way to apply it to your substrate. So first off, we need a contact adhesive or contact cement. So for this small piece, since it's just a test, we're going to be using 3M90. This is actually somewhat recommended online as a good alternative to something like the DAP Weldwood contact cement. So we're going to be using this for now, but for our larger pieces, it's going to be easier to roll on that Weldwood than spraying it. Then next, you need this little J roller, which is how you ensure that your laminate makes good contact with your substrate. And then of course for larger pieces, you'll need dowels. So these dowels are basically how you can align your laminate on top of your piece of plywood countertop before you overcommit. Because with the contact adhesive, as soon as the two surfaces touch, they're basically permanently bonded. So this allows you to have a little bit of wiggle room, adjust it, and then slowly pull out each piece before everything is stuck and committed. So since I've never done this before, I basically cut out this little piece of wood to test out this workflow on. So one of the things that we were debating was putting a little countertop here, and I figured, you know, we might as well make this test run usable if we did want to. We're gonna be doing that. That way there's no wasted effort. First steps are to cut the laminate to size. So you wanna oversize your cuts just so there's excess hanging all around the surfaces. And also don't forget to include your edges, because that's something that you'll need to cover also. So I'm gonna roll this out. It's kind of huge. We ended up getting a 5x10 sheet of laminate just because it was relatively inexpensive and it took a while to ship, so we didn't want to run out of it when we needed it. So I'm gonna unroll this and then just cut whatever pieces that I need to cover the tops and all the edges. Okay, slight change of plans. So I am going to use a circular saw just to make a long rip down here. This is so bulky that it's kind of easier to work in smaller pieces. So I did change out the blade to this 60 tooth one, and the way you do it is pretty simple on all of these circular saws. There's a little Allen wrench on the side. Take that out, unscrew the arbor, so it basically screws the opposite way than you're used to, just because the way that the circular blade naturally keeps it tight. And you'll take that out, take out the little silver piece too, and then put your new blade in, put the silver piece, and then screw back the arbor. So as you can see, I have our vinyl kind of laid out here, so we don't really need this to be a perfect cut just because there's going to be trimmings afterwards. You just want to make sure that it's oversized. But I did clamp down the roll because it does have a tendency to unravel, and that would make a huge mess, and I don't really want to get slapped in the face by this material. So my plan is to use this little 2x2 as my guide. And then I did put a little bit of plywood underneath here so that it kind of supports the cuts from the underside. That way there's less tear and all that stuff. But yes, so you will have to lower your blade just enough to cut through this, what is this, 1/16 of an inch material. Okay, so the circular saw cuts turned out really nice. I did break down the laminate into the actual dimensions that we need. So since this armrest is getting tucked into the corner, we only need to cover the top and this one long side and this one short side. So we're gonna be doing the sides first. Depending on the order of the way that you do this, you'll have edges pointing different ways. So in our case, or I guess in all cases, since this is a little thicker, that little black border, if you put the side on first, or the sides, and then your top on, you'll get that black border pointing outwards. Whereas if you did your top first and then your sides, you would get that little black border pointing upwards. So when we look down at this, we don't really want to see the black border, so we're gonna put the sides on first and then the top. So I think we're just gonna go for it. You know the drill. Shaky, shaky. Alright, so we're gonna follow the instructions on our can. We're gonna let it get tacky, testing it with the back of our hand, and then once it's tacky, we'll connect the two pieces. Okay, it's pretty tacky now, so we're just gonna go at it, making sure to leave an overhang on both sides. And then we'll take our roller and get out any air bubbles, all that good stuff. Make sure it's properly making contact. Feels pretty good. It's just like edge banding. Next step is to trim this down a little bit. So we're going to be using a flush trim bit on our router. Basically just a bit with a bearing at the end of it, which serves as like the guide. So it'll follow the surface and then beneath it cuts the material. So something I always have trouble with is making sure that this isn't tilting, because that will essentially gouge out your material. I don't really know how to solve that at this point, so I think we're just gonna go for it. Routing went relatively smoothly, but I think part of the issue with using 3M90 is that any overspray, for example, I kind of oversprayed the edges here, collected all of the sawdust material, and that makes it a little uneven. So when you go with the flush trim router bit, it kind of creates little bumps, as you can kind of see there. But it's all right. What we're going to do next is just file it, make sure it's all nice and flush, and then we can do the next side. Alright, and there is the finished product of this one side. So after filing, it definitely smoothed out all of my errors. And we're looking good. So we are going to repeat the process on this side. Okay, I got the second edge done. And here's what I mean when the order of, I guess, lamination matters. So since I did this second, you see all the way to the right, there's no black mark. But if we go to the first edge I did, you do have this kind of edge showing. So I don't think it matters for us in terms of the sides. However, the top we always want to do last, because that way when we look down on it, which is the most frequent viewing angle, we don't see that black line. All right, this is like the final boss. We got to route all of these edges. Here is the final result of our little armrest. So it all turned out pretty well. My only boo-boo was these little tear-outs on the corners, or at least that corner. So I'm gonna look online to see if there's ways to resolve that. But overall, happy with it. Good job, Liana. Here's our proof of concept piece seated in place on the armrest. So since it turned out good and there wasn't any major mishaps with it, I think we're gonna keep it installed. So that way, all that effort that I just put into building it, we can actually keep and use that. The 3M90 worked really well at bonding the laminate to the wood. However, as we did notice that it kind of made a mess, we're gonna wait until we get our DAP weldwood contact cement in to kind of contain that mess. So instead of spraying it on, which causes a bunch of, whatever, spray everywhere, we're just gonna be brushing on the weldwood. So that's not in yet. It'll come in probably tomorrow. So I think at this point, our plan is to just rip down a bunch of the sheets and have them prepared for applying to our other stuff, like this dude and this dude. So we'll do that, and then once that comes in, we can get all of the rest of it done, hopefully. We'll see. Liana is hard at work sanding our drawer countertop. So these are the tops of the long 48-inch drawer that we have coming out of the rear of the van. That's kind of part of our step. But she's sanding them right now and doing some prep work, because our plan with these is to stain both sides, and then we're going to put a coat of oil-based polyurethane on top. So the reasoning behind the oil-based polyurethane is that we wanted it to stand up to something like a drink sweating, right? Any water or anything that gets onto it, we want it to be protected. And also because we expect that it's going to get a lot of kind of wear and tear, and we don't want to damage the stain. So that's going to be nice. And the stain is going to be a nice touch just because, at the beginning of our build, we worked really hard on staining a lot of our upper cabinets. And then this kind of lower half is all covered with Baja, this beige color. So it'll have a nice kind of touch of stain right in this area, which is what she's sanding right now. This is gonna look so nice. Woo-hoo!
We're staining these just like we did our upper cabinets. So all we did was sand them, and we hand sanded them because we wanted all the sanding to go with the grain to make sure we don't have any like weird circles or anything like that. So we hand sanded. We did wood conditioner so that way we could soften it up a little bit and bring up some of the wood fibers. Sand it again. Now I'm doing the staining part, and then once it's stained, we'll cover it with the polyurethane.
Oil base.
Oil base. Yeah.
Looks good, little lady.
Almost there. And if you haven't watched our other video where I'm doing a ton of staining, go watch Upper Cabinets.
You heard it here first, folks. For the record, Liana said, "Do not talk to me while I'm in the middle of staining." Hi, Liana.
What did I say?
Do not talk to me while I'm staining. Here's the contact cement that we're going to be using for all of our countertops. So I'm starting with the smaller piece, and then as I get more comfortable with it, I'll graduate to the bigger pieces like our dinette and our kitchen countertop. So with this stuff, you could either use a short nap roller. So in this case, I just used one of these foam rollers that we had for our cabinet painting, or you could use a brush. So since I'm just doing the side pieces right now, I'm just going to use a brush. That way I can save the roller for the bigger pieces. And then I also have a bag ready in efforts to keep the applicators moist so that they don't dry out as I do all of these countertops throughout the day. So I'm basically going to be following the same steps that I did with the 3M90 stuff. Apply it to both the substrate and our laminate, let it dry, then slap them together. So I'm going to do that for all of these side pieces, and then since the top will be a little bit different, we'll continue from there, since that's when the little dowels will come into play. So far I've got this side and this side done. Now I'm waiting for the adhesive on both sides to set up. So I feel like I've got a good workflow going. The first tip that I have is you definitely want to prop up your tabletop or your countertop that you're actually adhering the laminate to. That way, not only is it easier to apply the adhesive to the edge, but when you apply the laminate, it's not like any of the overhangs aren't kind of resting onto like your actual workspace. Then I've also got some clamps down. These are helpful for routering. So I just put this one through our bench dog, but holding it in place while elevated is super easy and makes it easier to get your router across without this thing shifting. And then finally, when it comes to filing, it's easiest to put your finger on the file on top of your material. That way you maintain the super straight, perpendicular file without like any potential kind of rounding. So, good tips there. And I'm going to keep doing that for the rest of this. Slight change of plans. I'm going to be doing all of the edges on all of our countertops first before we do the top and bottom surfaces, just because once I get that roller out to cover all these areas, I don't want it to sit for too long before I can get to the next piece and apply it to that. So just trying to save our little foam rollers. We have finally and successfully finished putting the edges on our flip-up table, our dinette table, and our kitchen countertop. So we're moving on to the next steps, which is applying the top faces, or I guess the bottom, if you will. But I have these 1/4-inch dowels, and what these do is they basically shim your top from immediately adhering to your wood. That way you can kind of make some adjustments to where your alignment is and all that good stuff. And once you have it set in place, since the contact cement doesn't bond to things that don't have it on it, you can just slide these out. I can't do it with one hand, but you slide it out, and then this side can kind of drop down and start adhering, and then you can roll it out. So not only does it help you align stuff, but it also helps prevent bubbles, right? If you were to slap a huge sheet of this on, you might get some bubbles in various places. So we're gonna get this going. And so again, for that, I'm using this foam roller just because there's way more surface area to cover now. I just finished the kitchen countertop and brought it into the van so that we can get a little preview of what this is going to look like. So overall, it's looking very good. It's got nice kind of blending between our walls, our cabinet colors, as well as our stain. So it's looking very good. At this point, I've completed this guy, and then I also did both sides of the flip-up table, which will go right here. At certain viewing angles, we will be able to see the underside of the flip-up table, so that's why we decided to do both sides of it. And overall, the process has been going very smoothly. I think one of the things that I've learned so far is, at least as far as the flush trim router bit goes, you want to use the smallest diameter you have. So I've been using, well, I started off using I think a 1/2 inch, and what happens with that is it basically cakes up a bunch of adhesive and kind of sawdust along the side as you trim whatever piece. And that's really hard and takes a lot of elbow grease to remove all of that buildup. So I've been using isopropyl and a microfiber, basically just rubbing it off. It kind of is like an eraser in the sense that as you rub it off, it kind of clumps up and then falls down. So next steps are to get our little dinette piece finished. Good morning, everybody. It's the next day. So we did finish laminating all of our countertops last night. It went really smoothly. It kind of just takes a lot of time just because there's a lot of steps and there's kind of an order of operations that you have to go through. So looking back, we could have saved some time if we just used Goo Gone instead of isopropyl to rub off all that residue that I was talking about. I had just found isopropyl alcohol and just started using it, kind of just stuck with it. But then later I did try Goo Gone and it worked out way better. So for reference, it took about 12 hours to complete around 30 square feet of laminate, so use that information as you will. But right now, I got the countertop set up on our kitchen cabinet. I actually need to mount the kitchen cabinet to our walls and the floors first before I can add the countertop. This is because there's really only access from the top at this point since we did install our drawers. So we're gonna get that mounted right in this area. I've kind of already aligned it where I want it to be. And then once that's in, we can get this countertop installed. So let's get right into it. For mounting our cabinet, here's what I ended up doing. So I sunk 6 screws through the back into our wall as well as our framing. So there's framing back here. And I wanted that to be as high up as possible because as we drive around, the most likely thing that'll happen is that this will want to tip this way. Right, it can't tip backwards, but it'll tip this way. So holding it in place there is very important. And then in a similar concept, I did use an angle bracket. And I'm not going to be able to show this, but in one of the inner sidings, I did screw a little angle bracket into the siding as well as into the ground. Because similarly, if this were to tip this way, this part would want to lift first. So securing that is good. And it feels overall very solid. But I guess who knows how much forces will occur as we drive around and it's jostling around. So for these angle brackets, since it's in the toe kick, I did use these, I don't know what you call these, but 90-degree kind of bits. So it basically converts this kind of straight on angle down to something more perpendicular like this. This is made by DeWalt. I'm sure other people make it, but this one came with this little like flexible thing so you could kind of maneuver it however you need to. Let's get our countertop mounted. Here's our plan. So we have all of these pocket hold supports running the length of our cabinet, and we're just going to be screwing through those into our plywood countertop. So I think those supports were kind of optional for us since we are doing plywood on top, but for some of the like other alternative countertops like solid surface, quartz, any of that stuff, you have to have those just to help support the weight of the countertop itself. So we didn't need those, but we did add them. And alternatively, if you're using a wooden countertop, you could also use little angled brackets to screw into your siding and then into the countertop. But for us, we're just going to be using those little supports. Countertop is in. Then I also went ahead and installed the flip up table. So I don't know where I last left off, but I did mount the brackets and now I mounted it to the top. So it's a nice, very little gap. There's a little bit over here. I could probably adjust some stuff, but it's looking good. All right, it's all installed now. Let's get formal acceptance from the boss. Come here.
Oh, nice. Oh, wow. Looks so fancy. Looks good. Can I try this out?
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Somewhere we'll cook.
This is a little big counter. So now we can put the sink in.
Yeah, and the faucet. Nice. Good job.
I did end up adding this support piece. It was easier to do now while we don't have the sink yet installed. So it's one of those should we situations where you ask yourself, should we do this or that? And most of the time, it's good to just get it over with. So we did do it, and this definitely feels more solid, so good stuff. So our next step is to get the sink installed. So it's very straightforward. I'm kind of following directions, but our first step is to apply some alcohol or isopropyl alcohol, basically to clean off our flange of the sink as well as the countertop where the sink rests on top of. So we're going to wipe it down with that, and then to the countertop around our cutout we're going to apply some 100% silicone for the sealing. There's my bead. Now we can drop down the sink. Next steps are to get these pieces of hardware in. So honestly, I don't know if these are standard or not. I'm just following directions. But you have to bend this little bendy bit a little bit. This part hooks into the sink, and then this pushes onto your countertop. So the end result will look like that. Brianna is editing one of our videos in the van.
Yeah, it's a nice little tabletop here.
Yeah, we'll get this one in next.
Yeah.
But I got the sink in. That was not fun. So our sink had a little bit of a curve going back to front, and I thought that I could tighten down those pieces of hardware enough to make it flat. But I don't know if those hardware pieces were junk or if I just did something wrong. But we still have that curve basically here and here. So, much respect to all the plumbers out there, because that was not fun. I actually had to disassemble a bunch of our cabinet doors to get in there. But I think we're at a good spot. So, I'm going to add the drain. Our sink came with a drain. It came with a bunch of accessories too, so we're just going to get that installed. Drain is in, thanks to the plumber's putty. Ours came with a little basket, so that'll stop all of the food waste from entering our gray water tank.
What you got there?
It's our faucet. This is the faucet that you guys helped us decide on. If you want to be involved with the future decisions, check out our Instagram at It's Time to Crunch. But we're going to work on getting this installed. Besides the fact that this seems to be the most trendy van life faucet, we also like the fact that it came with a soap dispenser. So we purposely got this sink because we wanted to have a soap dispenser. So it had a cutout for it, and I've already got the dispenser installed. fairly straightforward. Just screw in a couple things and you're all good. Then for the faucet side, you want to connect the included hoses with it, and then we'll feed it through the hose hole, or the hole right there. And then we'll connect these to our supply valves, which are currently right there, but the blue side goes through this filter and pops out down here. So we'll connect that instead. Then, at least for our sink, it came with this little O-ring and this little screwy thing, and you screw that into that guy. I got the supply lines connected, and I got that little gravity ball weight for the hose so that it retracts back up installed. Now I guess we could turn on the valves. See if anything leaks. Well, that's good. Assistant! Good assistant. Alright, so let's give it a test. That's the hot water, different plumbing set. I'm no expert, but I think it's working.
Looks like it.
I got our cabinet fronts back on, and I wanted to give you a little peek at how I connected the gray water. So gray water, or at least drain plumbing, is kind of confusing to me. It uses a separate set of threads, which I'm not exactly sure of, and there's kind of different logics with it all. But our HEPA valve is 1.5 inch, and luckily our drain that came with our sink is also 1.5 inch. So I used the included HEPA elbow to basically use an elbow. Then from there I'm converting it to ABS. So this connection here is questionable. I don't actually know if that's supposed to connect like that. However, I did force it on with a little bit of Teflon tape, and we haven't gotten any leaks from there. So the ABS kind of continues, and since I didn't have a 90-degree elbow, I used 245s. It's a little less than optimal. I feel like I could have saved a little tiny bit of space if I just used the elbow, but since I didn't want to make a trip to the hardware store, I just used those connected with the ABS pipe glued in between. Then from there, I'm using kind of the opposite adapter of this to convert it back to threads so that I can connect my HEPA valve, and then it converts back to ABS where it runs into the rest of our gray water system. So if you want to see how our gray water system is plumbed, at least outside of the van or underneath it, you could check out our water video. And yeah, so I think we're gonna call the sink done. It's nice to see our kitchen countertop installed. We've also had our faucet and our sink for the longest time just sitting in boxes, so it's nice to see that it's finally mounted and actually usable. So for our water, I know we covered it a little bit here in this video, but you should check out our water system video just because that'll give you kind of the background on how I ultimately got that gray water pipe there, and of course the red and blue supply lines to underneath the sink. So that leaves our Dinette countertop. So I'm gonna swing around here. And for that, we're gonna be using the Lagoon table mount. This is kind of the gold standard of van life table mounts. It's pretty sweet because you can both pivot the table itself as well as the arm, so it kind of articulates. And then you can also adjust the height on this side. So there's lots of adjustability, making it very comfortable to use, and I guess that makes it multi-purpose. For example, not only can we use it to use our computers over here, but if we wanted to, we could probably make it this height, swing it over here, and then making an extension of this countertop. To mount our Lagoon mount, we opted for the silver plate. I think that's how they refer to it. And it's way smaller form factor as compared to the standard plate. So this is a relatively new release. The standard plate is about 6 by 8 inches, and one of the other benefits of this is that not only is it rated for the same weight, but when you mount your mount to it, it kind of is hidden. It hides behind this main arm of the table. So for mounting this, it seems relatively straightforward. Our plan is to identify the location where we want to install this. And what we are thinking right now is to install it a little bit towards the passenger side, right in this area. The reason being is that if we did have, say, guests, they wouldn't have to split their leg, say, from to the right of the table mount and to the left of it, and this way it's just kind of out of the way, so they could sit comfortably over there. Aside from that, it also means that we'll be able to tuck the table more towards the passenger side as we enter the bed area over here, or the dinette area from the driver's side. The hardware that's included is just a bolt, a washer, and a nylock. There's 3 sets of them. Obviously, there's going to be one for each of these holes. So I did bring out a Forstner bit just because I want a nice clean hole, but this is, I believe, 3/8 inch, so I'm just going to mark 3 positions into the side of this bench, drill through it, then we'll send the hardware through the bracket and screw it all down. Got the pilot holes done thanks to a couple shims, and whenever you're about to drill through something with 2 finished sides, for example, this side's going to be visible and the other side of this is going to be visible, start on one side, go about halfway, then finish it off from the other side. That way you get clean cuts on both sides. Okay, the bracket is installed, and now I'm going to just check how sturdy it is, but since this is 3/4 inch Baltic birch, it should be plenty strong for our purposes. I think in general you would probably prefer that your device failed over your structural stuff, in this case our bench. That way if we needed to repair something, we could just replace that as opposed to having to basically disassemble parts of your house. This has taken me a while, but I think I've got it figured out. So my first step was to draw a center line on our countertop, of course on the bottom, and that is basically how we center our bracket left and right with our table. Then after that, you're kind of having to define how you want your normal position of your table to be. So the normal position, in my kind of own definition here, is this ideal location where your table is, and it's also kind of both centered left and right for our purposes. With the center line kind of defined, you're basically trying to define your front to back, you know, how far back or how far forward you're mounting your table. So for us, we basically just wanted to leave a little gap just so we could squeeze through here without having to shift the table every time, and I think we're kind of at a good spot now. So that's the entire logic that I went through. I originally started with just basically shifting this table, literally hovering above where it would be positioned in our dinette or bed mode, but we didn't like having this touching here, so if we did want to leave a gap with it already mounted like that, then that would mean we would have to swing the table left or right, which would ultimately mean that there's a larger gap on this side or this side. So our normal position in our case is with a slight, this is about 9 inches here, enough to squeeze through, and at that gap we are centering it with the van. And there you have it, folks. Our dinette countertop is installed on the Lagoon mount. Oh, hi Liana. So I think for future improvements, or maybe for Van Build V2 if we ever get to that point, I think that I would probably chamfer the edge of the countertop so that it's kind of like this, and then as far as the bench seat goes, chamfer it the opposite way. So that way we don't need the rails, because personally I don't really like the rails as much. I mean, they serve a very important purpose for us, but I would have liked a cleaner look. I would have done that this time around, but I think that it's a little sketchy for me. I don't want to risk screwing it up, so maybe for Van Build V2. The next and final countertop that we're working on is our flip down table. So this is going to sit on the galley so that it flips down towards us when we want to use it. So Liana has stained our countertop here. It looks beautiful. We also did edge band it like we've been doing with all of our other stained stuff. And we went with stain just because it's a nice pop of color and kind of gives you a feel for the rest of what our van looks like. So at this point, I've already marked where I want the table, and the way that we're gonna be mounting this, oh Bailey. The way that we're gonna be mounting this is we're gonna do a piano hinge at the top. We're gonna have some sort of flip latch at the top so that when we do swivel it up, we can lock it in place. And then as far as supporting it, we are going the steel cable route. This is kind of a tricky situation overall. I don't think tables are usually meant to flip down. Some of the other alternatives are to have a supporting bracket underneath your table, which is in this case exposed on the outside when it's folded up. So you could also fold it down, and then on the bottom side of your table, you could swing a support out. But we didn't want a piece of wood visible on the exterior when it's folded up. So we decided to go the cable route, which is how we're going to be supporting it essentially from our galley down to the front of the countertop. So that was a lot of words, but we're going to walk through that process. So our countertop measures 24 inches tall by 18 inches wide. We kind of came up with those numbers based on what we thought the maximum dimensions that we could have for our flip down table to be. So you have to account for how tall the table kind of extends up when it's folded up, and then also the down position. So when it's folded out and usable as a table, you don't want it to be too low or too high. So ours ends up being right around 34 inches. Since this is marked, my first step is to get the piano hinge in. I've already marked center of where our countertop would be, marked by this line, and I'm gonna align that with our piano hinge. So these are 12-inch piano hinges, also known as continuous hinges, and there is a little notch somewhere, I can't see it through the camera. Right there, right in the center. That marks center. So I'm gonna align that with my center line here, also making sure that when I do fold this, it does fold all the way up. So I'm gonna start screwing this in, lots of screws. I got most of the screws for the piano hinge in, so now I'm just gonna remove all of them and then take off all the tape, because this should be aligned as we want it now. Now that the hinge is installed, I've also marked center of our board. That way I can align center of the board with the center of our hinge. I've also added these marine style D-rings. They're made out of stainless steel. We like them because obviously they look nice, and also because they fold down flush like this, or flush enough. So I do have them pointing that way to be flush, so that when we do tilt this board up, they naturally fall into the flush position. So you wouldn't want to flip this around, otherwise your D-rings would be sticking up like that. So I do have another pair of these. They're going to go on the cabinet, but I think at this point I'm going to install this to our piano hinge. That way, even if I tried to measure out where I want these D-rings to go, I don't miss. So I'm going to get this all test fit first. Piano hinge is mounted to the table now, and I just have it clamped up to help it suspend. So this method is kind of a way you could use this concept instead of using cables, but what some people do is they have another kind of cabinet here which they can swing out the door to help support this table. Otherwise, you kind of have to have this piece, like a piece of wood or whatever, that helps kind of suspend the table, say from mounting here to somewhere on your vehicle. But for our purposes, we're going with the cables. So I did close it. I did mark my corners. It's not the cleanest marking, but you can kind of see where I marked each corner. Where's this side? Over here. So in my opinion, that's close enough. And realistically, I don't want it to be perfectly in line with the way that this table folds up. I would rather have it perfectly kind of even this way, because you will be able to see those latches when the table is down. So now that I've marked the corners, I'm starting to drill some pilot holes for these latches to go on. So I want them to be concealed when the table's up, so I'm putting them within the boundary of where the table folds up. And I'm putting them pretty much as high as possible while still keeping them hidden, and that's to give this as much support as possible. So similar with these, the most ideal position is far out here. However, I didn't want to do that, and I also wanted to make sure that when this folds up, it's not bumping into another latch over here. So we're going with it like this, and I think it'll look nice. The D-rings on the galley are mounted now, so our next steps is working with this steel cable. So we bought a kit on Amazon. I'm by no means an expert at working with this stuff, but we did get steel cable. It's about 1/8 inch, and then it's coated with this rubberized kind of outside stuff. That way it doesn't scratch any of our finishes, like the paint, or more importantly, like the stain and the top coat on our table. So what we're going to be doing with this is building little loops. So as part of our kit, we have these little fair rule things. So basically, from the bottom up on one side, the cable will go through, then a loop around and go back through the other side, and then you crimp this around the cable. So you typically need a special tool to do the crimping, but I imagine you can get away with some sort of pliers if you have the leverage. And then to help keep its form of the loop, we're also going to be using these dudes that also came with the kit. So we're going to be making sure that we first get these around our D-rings and then go from there. I got the first set on, went on smoothly. I did have to bend the little loops to fit around the D-ring, then bend them back into shape before crimping it. But besides that, it feels very sturdy. So our next steps are to do these two. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to take square from our wall. That means that it's at least square with the rest of the van, but that doesn't account for whether or not you're on an unlevel surface. So if you did want them, our kit does come with these kind of inline adjustable situations where you can make some fine tuning. That way, if your van's parked in, say, a slant, you could kind of bring your table up so that it is more level. But we're just going to work on it with the square. I think it should be all right for our purposes. So next, I'm just going to repeat the process for these dudes. Okay, and we got all the cables done, and it turned out nice and square with our galley. So we could take a peek at closing this. One thing that I did notice is that the steel cables want to push outwards, so I'm gonna have to figure that out, whether that be an elastic band or if there's some way to manipulate the cable where it will curve kind of towards the inside. So we'll save that for another time, but we're basically done with this. The one thing that I'm not going to be doing just yet is installing our latch to keep this upwards, and I'm waiting for a package for that. But we will be using a gate latch or a flip-up latch, something along those lines, to latch this to the vehicle so it stays up when we're driving and all that stuff. But they do make gate latches that could either mount to the edge here and then to here, but I'm going with the ones that are kind of based on like a parallel system. So I will be mounting it on the inside here and here so that nothing is showing when it is in the upward position. I had a little Jimmy Neutron brain blast thinking about how to make these cables tuck inwards instead of outwards. So after I thought about it for a little bit, I figured it out. So all I had to do was put a little twist on each of the wires. So I think for the right side I went clockwise, and then this side I went counterclockwise. That way now, with that little spin on it, the cables get sucked back in when it's in the upright. So I'm happy about that because now I don't need to add some sort of elastic band or whatever to it. So you might want to check how yours are going to be tucked in once your table is upright. Luckily for me, I could just remove the D-ring and twist it. Otherwise, I would have to have cut the cable clamp, which would have meant that I have to redo the entire cable. So luckily, I just rotated this 180 degrees, and we're all set. A little close up for you. Get back in there. There you go. Woo! Nice. Happy days. We definitely went into greater detail with this countertop than we did with the rest of it. I feel like the flip down counters, or these tables just like this, specifically using the cables, isn't really something that's well documented. I didn't find really any how-to videos on how to do it, but I did find pictures of what people did and kind of tried to reproduce it. So hopefully this was helpful, and yeah, I really am happy how this turned out. And there you have it, folks. all of our countertops are finally complete, so it's nice that we can use all of this surface. So to summarize, we applied Formica to a lot of our countertops. That went really smoothly. It's a lot of steps, obviously. And then our flip-up table was simple enough, just some hardware that you install to both your siding and your counter. And then of course the cable-based flip-down table, which was pretty sweet how it resulted. So
we're really happy with how everything turned out. I didn't know it was going to look this nice, and especially using Formica, we weren't really sure how it was going to turn out, but it looks really good. I'm so excited to be moving in soon, so hopefully you enjoyed it, and hopefully this can inspire your future build as well. So thanks for watching, and if you have any questions for us, leave them in the comments. Let us know if you're working on a build too. And then if you want to subscribe, follow along our adventures, hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks for coming along.
See you later.